Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wa sallam ala Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Imma ba'd. On the 7th day of the month of Dhul-Qa'dah of the year 1438, Anno Hijri, coinciding with the 30th of the month of July of the year 2017, Anno Domini, we greet you all with the greeting of Islam. We say to you all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we continue our studies in the book of marriage, as has come in the work Minhaj al-Salikin wa Tawdih al-Fiqh fi ad-Din, the path of the journeyman and elucidation of jurisprudence within the religion. If memory serves, I believe that we have come to Bab Shurut al-Nikah, chapter heading, the conditions of marriage. The conditions of marriage. Now, before we continue with that, we pose the question, what are the two elements that constitute the marriage itself taking place? There are ceremonial items that take place, yes, but there are two specific things where the marriage itself, once it takes place, the marriage is official. It happened. What are those two things? Yes? You see me, huh? Good. Al-ijab and qabul. We have the proposal and acceptance of that proposal. So the guardian proposes or offers the hand of the bride to the groom. 1. 2, the groom then accepts. When those two things take place, that actually is the marriage itself. Good. Now, we move on to discussing the conditions of marriage. The term shurut is the plural of the term sharat. The term conditions is the plural of the term condition. Ergo, what is a condition in Islam? Barakallahu feekum. Review from last week. What is a condition in Islam? For example, we quite frequently speak about the conditions of prayer. For example, what is a condition? Yes.
Obligation.
An obligation. They are obligatory. Good. Keep going.
Something that without it taking place,
Mm-hmm.
then that which is one sets out to do is invalid.
Good. So that which out. Say that again.
That
And raise your voice so everyone can hear.
a condition is something that without it taking place, that which one is
A condition is
with one
without it
account,
taking place.
whatever you're trying to do, if that doesn't take place, then it's invalid.
Then it's invalid. Good. So the definition of a condition is this: ما يلزم من عدمه العدم وما لا يلزم من وجوده الوجود بذاته. That which its non-existence necessitates non-existence, and that which its existence does not necessitate the existence of the reason it is done. And we know that sounds pretty jargony, if that's a word, right? But we break it from there into two parts. That which its non-existence necessitates non-existence. Meaning, if the condition does not exist, then the act does not exist. That's the first half. If the condition does not exist, the act does not exist. That which is non-existence necessitates non-existence. So if one doesn't exist, the other can't exist. Second half, and that which is existence does not necessitate the existence of the reason it is done. So, if it doesn't exist, the act doesn't exist. By the same token, if it does exist, it still doesn't mean that the act exists. Anything that fits this definition is a condition in Islam. So let's take an example of that. No wudu, no salah, right? Good. So if your wudu doesn't exist, your prayer doesn't exist, right? That which is non-existence necessitates non-existence. However, if you are in a state of purification, does that absolutely mean that you are praying just because you're in a state of purification? No. So just because it exists doesn't necessitate the existence of the reason it's done. We see that? Okay. So anything that fits this definition is a condition in Islam. So now we are speaking about the conditions of nikah, the conditions of marriage. Now, by understanding of the definition, when do these conditions come into existence? Do they come into existence before the act, during the act, or after the act has been done in order for the act to be valid? When does it need to happen?
Before.
Jihad says before. What the rest of us say? Huh?
Oh, nah,
Changing his position? Change his position? So now what you say? During. Okay, so Jihad was saying before, and now he's saying during. That is how the scholars differ. Tell you. So, what do the rest of us say? These conditions of marriage, yes.
In my mind, and I don't know if it's accurate, in my mind, it's like a prereq, so that's why I said before. It's a prerequisite for this to occur.
Good.
It has to happen before whatever it is that you're pursuing.
Good. So, Sister Corinne is right, and Jihad was right before he changed the position. Good. So, conditions, they are prerequisites. They must exist before the act in order for the act to be valid. All right? Not during, not after, before the act. Now that we understand the when, we can look at what these conditions are. The author states, it is imperative to have the consent of both spouses. Consent, muwafaqa. There must be consensual agreement between both parties that they want to marry one another. Right? So that consent doesn't happen during the marriage or after the marriage. You get consent before the marriage. Right? Okay. And this is an interesting item here. The author provides two exceptions. One is relative to us to a degree. He says, except for the saghira, except for the female who is before the age of puberty. Except for the female that is before the age of puberty. He states that it is possible for the father to enter her into a marriage. Before consent. Good. So that look that we have now means what? So the first thing is this. These discussions are exploring the framework of the Sharia. the infrastructure of legislation. These things do not necessarily mean what should be done in every scenario. So then, what becomes the guiding factor on whether something like this should or should not be done? We're speaking about this exemption from consent. Go ahead. Okay, let's take it a step further. Is that something in our day and time in the U.S. of A that would be considered acceptable or would be considered ethical? No.
That would be considered unjust.
It would be considered unjust in this country. Why? Go ahead. Why would it be considered unjust and unethical and improper, inappropriate,
Because of the age.
even unlawful because of the age?
Yes.
Good.
Free choice.
Free choice.
The idea of free choice.
Uh-huh.
Laws.
It goes beyond any kind of religious understanding.
Good. So these items that you're mentioning, what is the guiding factor behind everything that you just mentioned?
Well, with the Sharia is legislation.
Huh? Okay. Name the items that you all mentioned. Right. You all mentioned some. The brothers mentioned some. They said that it wouldn't be acceptable because we said unlawful. We said it's unethical. We said this takes away a person's choice. This is a country of free choice. A brother mentioned
I mentioned age group.
age group, right? Okay, age group, good. What is the God behind everything that you all just mentioned? Huh? There's something there. It's a God there. Because what we say for us here in this country may be different in another country. Yes.
It's just cultural.
It's cultural. Exactly right. This goes back to our opening discussions about marriage and the relevance of culture to marriage and the place of culture in marriage. And we had cited the point that situationally and conditionally, culture can become an evidence in Islam.
So would you be saying that the Sharia is based on the culture of the Arab?
So are we saying that the Sharia is based upon the culture of the Arab? No, we're not saying that. We're saying that the Sharia puts certain, at times, hard laws into place. Sometimes there are guidelines that are put into place. And other times, there are other areas that are malleable. And those areas that are malleable, not always, but more often than not, the guiding factor is culture. Culture then becomes the evidence. Not Arab culture, culture in general. Whatever people's culture. Right? We'll take a very small example of this. Here's the principle. This is a benefit that we received from Sheikh Suleiman al-Ruhaili. May Allah preserve him when we were studying a work in poetry by the same author, Sa'di, covering al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, covering fiqh principles. Whenever the Sharia offers a commandment that is general and it does not specify the commandment, then the specification becomes the urf, the customs of the people in that time and in that place. Okay? That's the principle. Sheikh Suleiman, may Allah preserve him, added a further qualifier to that even, and he mentioned, in accordance with the, not just the people, but the customs of the Muslims in that time and that place. Good. The principle. Whenever the Sharia is general, then the customs of the people in a time and place specify that generality. Then the customs of the people in a time and place specify that generality. Yes, fill in the gaps basically, yes. Sheikh Suleiman qualified that further by not leaving it open to people, but the Muslim people in a time and place. That was the view of the Sheikh, may Allah preserve him. Now, let's take an example of this. Tell me some of the guidelines in Islam for traveling as it relates to prayer. Shortening your prayer when you're traveling. Good, we find that. What else? Combining your prayers. Right? We find that. Okay, let's take those two. Right? So you find shortening your prayers. You find combining your prayers when you're traveling. Right? Okay, good. And we have explicit ahadith in this regard. Right? Okay, good. What verse or what hadith can you present where the Prophet ﷺ specified the distance for something to be considered traveling so that we know when to begin shortening and combining our prayers?
That's relative.
Huh?
That's relative.
Now you're saying that's relative. How is it relative?
Because, as you mentioned in the general statement,
Uh-huh.
that because of hardship of travel in and of itself,
Mm.
that the guidelines of shortening and combining was put.
Mm.
But based on what is actually traveling, I guess is up to the culture.
Okay, good. Good. There are some details we can mention in this example, but we want to keep it simple. So, there is no direct text from the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he mentions a specific distance that equates to traveling. That doesn't exist. Okay? There you can find observations from some of the companions, but you can't find the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam specifying anything as a distance for travel. So far, so good. So we have general. The Sharia is general about what we do when we travel. As for what is considered traveling, it's left open. So what then becomes the restrictor so that we know what traveling is? The urf, the customs of the people in that time and in that place. Or as Sheikh Suleiman would say, the customs of the Muslims in that time and in that place. So now we're looking at not Arab culture, as you mentioned. Now we're looking at what do the American people consider traveling? When Americans are traveling, what do we generally consider to be traveling? Is it when we leave one state to go to another state? Is it when we go a certain distance inside of one state? Do we do it by time? If we're driving for a half hour, 45 minutes, what do we generally consider to be traveling? Right? That then becomes the question. Once that question is answered, then we have our answer. Is it something that Americans agree upon across the nation? Or do we find in the more northern regions, shorter distances are considered traveling in comparison to when you go further south? You ask them where the supermarket is at, they say down the street and around the corner, but it's like a little bit of a ride. You follow? Good. So now it becomes regional. So now it's okay. What do the people in the DMV generally consider traveling to be? That then becomes the evidence for what traveling is.
So,
Culture,
consensus.
customs. Huh?
Would it be consensus? Because now you're talking about whether, in reference to women or sisters needing a mahram or not. So would that be something that they would be able to choose for themselves based on what they consider travel to be?
Okay, so the brother is asking, now that we get to this point, is it something that is premised upon consensus of the people? No, it's not premised upon consensus. The next principle becomes al-hukm al-ghalib. The verdict is based upon the majority case. So the people generally, the people at large, what do they consider to be traveling? Right? What I found generally in this area, me observing me because I'm not from here, right? Also like half of the crowd looking at you guys, right?
Can I say something?
So, go ahead.
Miles. How many miles you have to go to get from place to place?
Yes. Some people may look at it that way. I mean, I'll tell you what I've observed in this area. In this area, generally what I've observed is that people who are in or closer to DC, when they come in or around Baltimore, they consider that traveling. And they will begin to shorten and combine their prayers. I've also seen people who are in or around Baltimore, when they get in or around DC, they'll begin to shorten and combine their prayers.
Okay, hold on. Can I say something?
They consider that traveling.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
So I think, and this is not knowing the intent of the people, I think some people just take advantage of that because they may do that, but at the same time, if they consider that traveling, then technically their wives shouldn't travel that distance without a mahram.
Then technically the wife shouldn't travel this without a mahram to Jihad's second point.
Correct.
Okay.
But that's not the case.
That's not the case.
That's not the case.
Their wives are going. Okay, good. So let's look at that hadith. Right? We don't want to get too far outside the book of marriage, but we want to impress upon you all the situations or the conditions where culture can become in evidence. Right? This is what we're taking examples of. Okay, good. So, in accordance with the sunnah, do we find that it's whenever a woman is traveling that she needs a mahram? Or is the sharia a bit more particular than that when it comes to women traveling? Is there a stipulation that's present? Or is it open? Just whenever women travel, they need a mahram?
No, stipulation.
What's the stipulation?
Safety.
That one has to be considered traveling. That people consider that traveling. It's not visiting a neighbor. It's traveling.
Uh-huh.
And under the banner of traveling, they pack up, you whatever that culture consists of traveling. And let me mention safety, that something can happen to her on the way.
Okay, so what do we find in the sunnah? Is there a hadith that mentions something about women needing a mahram when they travel, and does it say anything else? Or does it only say women need a mahram when they're traveling?
I don't know exactly, but I know we find in a case where one of the companions' wife wanted to make Hajj.
Uh-huh.
And he was, I believe it was a battle or something they was in.
Good.
And the Prophet encouraged him to go with your wife
Uh-huh.
for the severity of having a mahram. So
Good.
I would use that as a...
And at that time, from Mecca to Medina, that was about a 2-week travel. Allah knows best. I'm talking about a range of about a 2-week travel. Right? Okay, good. Now, the hadith mentions, though, that the woman needs a mahram when she's traveling for a distance of 3 days and 3 nights. Not less than. Another hadith mentions a distance of a day and a night. And the women know these narrations. So it's not just that she's traveling, just the fact that she's traveling, now you need a mahram. No, it's traveling and the distance of a day and a night, and the distance of 3 days and 3 nights. Then she needs a mahram, not less than. So there is a range in which she can travel without a mahram.
So now you're saying that distance is something that is used
Right.
Whereas before you were saying that it's open and there wasn't anything that constituted what traveling was.
No. So we're looking at traveling we looked at traveling as an independent entity. And then we added another factor of women traveling. So within the realm of what's considered traveling, both men and women can travel. One, right? The two is, once it gets into a certain space in traveling, then a woman will need a mahram. But if it's before that point, a woman can travel without a mahram. It's still traveling.
You mean a certain space?
3 days, 3 nights. 1 day, 1 night. Yes. Go ahead.
Is it possible to travel to California because that's less than 3 days and 3 nights?
Good. Excellent point. We heard the question? Mm-hmm. Good. I'll raise you one. So we were sitting with Sheikh Ali Nasser Fiqihi, may Allah preserve him, pretty often in the Prophet's Masjid during our stay there. And he would raise this issue, right? Okay, good. Then he would say, based off our means of travel today, you can go quite possibly almost around the world, or at least to the other end of the world, in a day and a night. So does that now mean that a woman can just travel because now we can get certain places faster? Right? And then he would say, no, it doesn't mean that. But what's meant is a distance of a day and a night. What's meant is a distance of 3 days and 3 nights in accordance with the means of travel at the time that the statement was said. So at the time that this statement was said, what were their means of travel? Camel, foot, horse, right? etc. So utilizing those means of travel, the distance that a woman could reach in 3 days and 3 nights then becomes the determining factor. But we still see that cultural tie that's connected there. Because in answering the question, he said premise upon the means of travel during that time culturally. You follow? So the point that we're making again, and these are just examples, right? These are just examples, not necessarily to specify these discussions. What we're saying is that there are areas in Islam where culture becomes the guide, where culture becomes the evidence. You follow that? Now, for us in the US of A, in all of these different areas where culture is needed to specify certain things in our faith, how can we then specify them if we have not even embraced our own culture to have that guideline?
Embrace sounds optional.
Huh?
Embrace sounds optional.
Embrace sounds optional.
Yeah, like we're choosing not to.
See, Ibrahim is black and white, all right?
No,
So go ahead. But no, he's white today. He's white hats. So go ahead.
I think that statement is relative to what a person actually accepts as culture, being African Americans, and how we, came through. So it's like,
Okay, good. So now being African American is relevant because you brought it up. I didn't, right?
okay.
Because now we're speaking about culture because culture is relevant. So keep going.
So when you use the term embrace, the culture is actually developed once we actually got here, which is on our own volition. So it's like, what is it that you're talking about to be embraced is what I'm basically
I'm talking.
Good. So what is it that we are talking about to be embraced? Good. We haven't even gotten into the space to have that discussion and make that decision because we are too busy importing other people's cultures and superimposing them onto our own identity.
Wouldn't this, I would say that as a Muslim,
Islam
would take that place.
That Islam will take that place. So how can Islam take that place when we need culture as a part of Islam? Go ahead.
I think you alluded to it in the last without a culture.
In many aspects, many areas, we are people without a culture. Go ahead.
Take on things from various different cultures, and a lot of Muslims have adopted what they perceive to be Islam, but it may in fact just be the culture of that region.
Right.
But here, I think we have a hodgepodge.
Mm.
We really do, and we don't really know where some of this stuff comes from.
Mhm.
It might have come from our ancestry that was enslaved. It might have come from the slave master. It might have come from the immigrant communities.
Right.
I mean, we have so much that's mixed up. I think it's hard for us to identify what is really culturally authentic.
Good. Good, good. So the space that we need to begin entering into is the space of culture creation. We do need to enter into that space. Many of our brothers and sisters don't necessarily have that challenge because they are still connected to their heritage and their culture. But now when we have the discussion, we get lost in this space because of our disconnect.
I don't necessarily see it as unfortunate.
Go ahead.
It's almost like the analogy of someone sends you to a grocery store without a shopping list, but you're blamed because you don't know what to get off the shelves. Like it's not. We're in a scenario.
We're not saying blame.
Okay.
We're saying awakening, and now moving forward in that state of consciousness.
But
So let's look at it differently, right? Okay, I have on a thobe, you have on a thobe, right? Sheikh Malik has on a thobe. Why are we wearing a thobe thinking that it makes us more religious? Why are we wearing a thobe thinking that it connects us more to Islam? Why are we doing that?
So I would answer that.
So Islam is in our clothes?
No, but the Muslim wants to differentiate himself from the non-Muslim, right?
The Muslim wants to differentiate himself or herself from the non-Muslim.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and we're in a non-Muslim land.
We're in a non-Muslim land. Okay.
So therefore, you'd like to pick your Islamic land X.
Pick your Islamic land X.
Right, because you're not in one.
That's it, right? That's in the discussion right there.
But you're not in one. So like this. Let's say there are no Islamic lands. The Muslims would still adopt different clothing to differentiate themselves.
Let's say there are no Islamic lands.
Right, and
the Muslims would still adopt
Islamic clothing.
Differentiate
themselves.
To differentiate themselves
from the non-Muslims.
From the non-Muslims, premise upon what?
The principle that you are to look different than a non-Muslim.
Okay, but what are they utilizing as a guideline to actually make these selections? Us wearing these thiyab that we wear, right? And now I'm direct. So this is a Kuwaiti thobe. That's what it is, right? Okay, so where do we get this idea from in America? Where it come from?
I don't know. I disagree with that characterization.
See. So, no, it's a clear question. So where did it come from? Why are we in America wearing these thiyab and then connecting these thiyab to our Islam? Why? You all know, you just don't want to say it.
Right. No, it's something that is adopted from early Muslims that they wore.
It's adopted from early Muslims.
That they wore this type of
It's
clothing.
from overseas. I mean, that's known.
It's from overseas. So it's from another culture.
Right, but
that we've imported into our own culture.
That Allah's mandated for us to go there once a year.
Huh?
There's a connection. Allah's mandated us to go there once a year. Two holy sites in Islam. I mean,
Okay.
there's some connection.
All right, Allah's mandated us to go there once a year. Yet the Indians, the Bangladeshis, right, the Afghanis, they go there once a year. They don't come back looking like this to their countries.
But they have a luxury of not having been an entire population imported to their land and saying, hey, remove your culture. So there's a different characterization.
So remove your culture.
No.
So there is a culture that exists for those people.
But they have that luxury. We don't.
So do you think if we wear a dashiki or something that African people from certain parts of Africa wear, then now we're getting our culture back? Did you say that?
I know that people who affiliate themselves with the Pan-African community wear dashikis and such in this country. I don't know that I've seen that as frequently when I went to Africa, though. Okay. Right? But But in principle, yes. In principle, what we're saying is, what is wrong with us
Connecting back to that.
connecting back to our cultural heritage? What's wrong with that?
Because I think culture implies a language familiarity. It implies a connection, historical family. There's a connection. Culture itself is not something ambiguous. You don't just make it up one day. It's something that connects you.
Okay.
So we're not connected to that. So
We're not connected to that.
So while historically that may be a 400-year origin,
Okay.
that's not the reality 2017. So then to say, not say arbitrary, but then to say that we are mandated without taking into effect the last 400 years, I don't know if I, technically
Okay. So let's say we've been disconnected from that culture. I'm coming. We've been disconnected from that culture.
Right.
Okay. So because we've been disconnected from that culture, we don't have our own culture. So as Muslims now, our options are European culture or Arab culture. And then that's okay.
I'm saying that's a starting point.
It's still so now European culture and Arab culture is a starting point.
Right, that's where we at. That's reality.
It's still culture.
That's where we at.
That's not ours. Okay, so sister left first, and then go ahead. So go ahead,
Raising my hand.
please.
Okay.
Culture.
Culture is very, very, very relative. This is what I taught at grad school level, and there's no one agreed-upon definition for culture. But what most people will say is that it encapsulates the arts, the literary tradition, the dress, the food, the just all sorts of language,
Good.
the traditions of a group of people
Good.
as they gel over time. So if a group of people are together, then all of a sudden, they start to do things in a similar way. That becomes their culture.
Good.
The problem now is that with the internet, with TV and cable, cultures are not isolated.
It's more global now. Yes.
So people will be exposed to other cultures. So I as an individual, don't believe in cultural misappropriation, for example, that someone can steal and misuse your culture. This is what happens with culture.
Alaikum salam.
So
I should come here at 5:30, right?
the culture of a people
47 minutes. Go ahead.
will define the dress, define other things. What happens with us as Muslims here in this country is that you had at one point a dress associated with people who called themselves Muslim.
Right.
That was long dress for women, something covering the hair.
Right.
And the men wore, this was the nation and whatnot. So some wore suits and ties, some wore other things.
Okay.
But then when you had the Muslims who embraced the Sunnah, to tell you the truth,
To tell me the truth. Okay, let's talk it.
people look at a couple of sources,
A couple sources, which are.
which are
Uh-huh.
the National Geographic. I'm going to be just real. People looked around and looked at magazines and pictures of people in places where they said these are Muslims.
Places that weren't here, though, right?
They weren't here.
Thank you.
They thought this was, because of just saying you're supposed to wear something on your head or whatever, and traditionally here in America we didn't do that. Then you looked at other places that did.
Good.
And if you identified with like the particular style, so some people wore shalwar kameez because they liked the Indian style and that was available. Some people wore other types of clothing depending on what was available. But we have a hybrid culture, especially because of the internet. So you might have on.
So you say hybrid, I say imported.
Everything is important. When you look at some place where you got like that dress that you say was Kuwaiti, if you look at Kuwaiti.
See, now it's a dress, though. Now it's not a throw, now it's a dress. Go ahead.
The dress that you say is Kuwaiti. lady, meaning the manner of dress. When you look at their history, historically, did the men have that on? Is that what they wore? If you look at what is considered a Saudi collegiate style dress for the women,
Right.
when you look at their museums
Right.
and look at the history of their dress, is that what they had on back in those days?
Mm-hmm.
And even going back to the time of the Prophet.
Sorry, so-
So
Right. It evolved over time.
it always is evolving. It's
Good.
always changing. So to say that there's a fixed, static culture, that's not how culture works. So it's always evolving with the people. And, you know, if one chooses to adopt a particular dress, as long as it adheres to the guidelines that have been outlined in Islam. So to me, it's like that thing we were talking about
Good.
the marriage. And somebody being able to get married
Mm-hmm.
with the father's permission before puberty.
Right.
Because Islam is supposed to cover all situations for all time.
Correct.
So they have to consider the person that's out in the village and the person that's in the city. The person who, you know, in 2017 and the person beyond that.
Correct.
So it's wide enough, and I think we try to narrow it. We try to confine it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to whatever it is our culture at the time or what we are comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's our culture that a woman can get on Amtrak and go to D.C. and back to go to work,
Right.
then we say, okay, then we have this argument about whether or not she's traveling.
Right.
But the reality is, I think at some point, Allah gives us the understanding, and we as a people have to look at what's there and say, do I really feel like I'm traveling? If I'm traveling, this was a discussion with Shaitan here the other night, when he was giving an example of the juice. If you drank apple juice thinking it was wine, have you sinned? Okay. So if she thinks she shouldn't be traveling, or that she is traveling, when she does that, that's something she's got to deal with in her family. But if she doesn't consider that traveling, and it's not this fixed thing where it may not be the same answer for each person
Good.
in each situation.
Absolutely. And we're getting closer to my point. Sister Corinne, go ahead.
I was just gonna, I was thinking about the subject of marriage.
Uh-huh.
Because we left off talking about the marriage at puberty. But culturally, people marry relatively young, even in this country, historically.
Correct.
So it's
Not going back that far.
It's only recently, in the past century maybe, that people started pushing the age of marriage further and further up.
Correct.
My grandparents were married at 15.
Absolutely.
You know, that is even culturally, if you look
My
at
grandmother as
our
well.
culture, there's a lot of things that would be in line with the Islamic guidelines, if you will. But since it's just been moved, we keep moving further and further away
Mm-hmm.
from that. So I think as far as just identifying the culture, I know for myself and my family, the cultural things that we do are largely centered around these holidays.
Right.
And so, in not wanting to align myself with these holidays, you kind of have this void.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is the culture in my family. I mean, Kwanzaa, for one, was the biggest celebration in my family. But
Okay.
I didn't want to perpetuate some of the things that they were doing as part of that celebration. So,
Right.
it's kind of hard to figure out what is and is not permissible, even from a cultural standpoint. So.
Okay, good. Good. So from here, what we want to identify, one, is that there's a difference between Islam and culture. And just because a people happen to be Muslim doesn't mean that everything that they're doing is Islam. Some of that can be cultural, and it can be okay in those areas where culture is in evidence, situationally and conditionally.